before I assign the mathematics, I want to get the dimensional analysis hammered out in a way that will make the math more accurate once it is assigned. It's never going to be right. The mathematics is never going to describe the laws of nature, in my opinion. It just doesn't work that way. We can approximate the laws of nature, but our laws of physics are never the laws of nature. When you talk about the laws of physics, those are laws that men make. And then the real laws, the actual things that actually happen, the way the world actually is this more complex, less abstract thing that we don't necessarily ever, it looks like, get a hold of because of our condition, because we're embedded in the world that we're trying to describe. And so that's at least my philosophy on it. But the dimensional analysis is important once when you start to try to describe the cosmos. When I try to start describing what I consider to be astrotometric translation, an understanding of what I mean by hypertime and hyperspace, and the time displacement between these worlds is key. Because in astrotometry, Rob Bryanton brings up in his book, I'll go ahead and tie in another thing here, the interference patterns that come from these other places. He makes a reference to wave tanks, and this is where astrotometry came from originally. Was my alternative analysis of what the mechanics of light are. And so if you consider the interference pattern that makes up a particular universe, like if this is the current universe right here, and you've got all of these other three-dimensional worlds, in astrotometry, I consider more than 10. I consider that these are potentially these other worlds. It's more like the Everettian mini worlds, that these are multiple on multiple levels. And I don't know that it's more than two others that bring us to the third. Rob may have something there that I haven't actually physically fleshed out in the theory, since we know that these waveforms do not have any control over how they interfere, over how they interact with one another. That these sources, where these sources are, may be the source of our ability to exert our choices and our freedoms and our free will on the universe. I think that's a brilliant analysis. And in astrotometry, it's even a little more complex than that, because the world itself, because the three-dimensional world itself is understood to be physically manifest through this other hypertime issue. And so there's this concept that these worlds are created, in a sense, by the same underlying hypertime. That this interference pattern has a feedback loop that's associated with it that has a cycle. In other words, that there is a particular time relationship between these worlds that underlies their physical presence and the influence that their wave patterns, their node patterns, in astrotometry I refer to them as node patterns, have on the construction of the current universe, or the universe that we presently perceive. And one of the age-old issues in physics and philosophy is the concept of original cause. What is actually causing the things that we see to manifest? Now, in Newtonian mechanics, this was abstracted into the concept of a force and an object. And so we have this, in Newtonian mechanics, we have this object-body relationship where you have an arbitrary object. It has a mass, it has a velocity, it has a momentum, that would be p, that all affect its physical relationship to all other objects. And so this, in Newtonian mechanics, was abstracted, unfortunately, with the concept of time. When time was used to describe the mass velocity relationship, the momentum, and the position, the x, y, and z position of the object, this variable was invented. So Newton invented this concept of time to describe the way the mass, velocity, and the momentum of objects. If this is a three-dimensional object, and then there's another three-dimensional object here that has a mass, velocity. If they collide, you can use Newtonian mechanics to predict exactly what's going to happen with these two objects, and it works very, very well. But the issue is that there is an unmoving mover that was abstracted out of this from the Aristotelian wisdom about this. In astrotometry, I'm trying to reclaim it wasn't my goal to vindicate Aristotle. That's not something that I ever planned on doing. I didn't know about Aristotle when I first started analyzing the waves in the wave tanks. I didn't know about it. My physics teacher didn't know enough to say, oh, this sounds a lot like Aristotle's theories. He didn't know enough to say that. But the concept, the breakthrough in astrotometry is the nature of the underlying node pattern. So if you consider the object, the sphere, as a bunch of other particles, as we've learned, that exist on the quantum level, on the molecular level, in chemistry, or however you want to, what other discipline also respects this concept, that when you start tearing it apart, when you start analyzing this object, there's all these little objects that it's made of. And this is just infinite regress, it seems. Particle physics is looking for smaller and smaller particles, and when you get down to the level where the neutron, the proton, on the atomic level and the subatomic level, they start to act like waves. And so in astrotometry, this is understood to be an interference pattern from waves that are reacting at a distance. And so the concept is that the Earth itself is this way, and that the Earth is created by the energy patterns that come in from all around. And so there's this light that we see coming from the stars, there's the light that we see coming from the sun, and it moves, and we seem to move with it in a sort of clockwork. And the concept is that these interference patterns are constantly changing. The interference pattern is constantly changing, and that the spin of the Earth is actually a factor related to that, rather than the concept that it is actually rotating in Newtonian sense. The spin of the Earth itself is understood to be the effect of this pattern changing through time. And the way that this pattern changes through time is with the hypertime translation, or the astrotometric translation. Now this is where it gets challenging. This is the most challenging concept in astrotometry, because the underlying subatomic particle, if you consider a single of these particles, let's for a moment, let's consider a single case where you have a single particle